My name is Josie Barrett, and the night my father looked me in the eye and told an entire room that I was barely worth the air I breathed, something in me broke for good. He said it with a smile, as if humiliating me was a family tradition instead of a wound he kept carving deeper every year. I walked away that night determined never to give him another piece of me, but I had no idea he would come after the last thing I had left and drag my past, my silence, and the truth I'd buried for a decade straight into the light. I pulled into the Sedona venue just as the sky shifted from orange to violet, the red rocks glowing under strings of warm lights. The music drifted across the open lawn, a soft country beat mixing with the clink of champagne glasses and the easy laughter of people who had always known how to belong. I slipped into the crowd unnoticed, settling near the end of the family table, a place where no one would feel obligated to make room for me. No one called my name, and no one asked how I'd been. The familiar distance wrapped around me the moment I sat down, thin but sharp, the kind of silence I'd grown used to carrying. When the MC invited my father to speak, my stomach tightened. He walked up with the swagger of someone who enjoyed an audience a little too much. His face was flushed with drink and the glow of attention as he raised his glass. Instead of a blessing, he let out a booming laugh and talked about how proud he was of people who had their lives figured out, unlike those still stuck in jobs no one cared to understand. He never said my name. He didn't have to. Heads turned. A few people chuckled. I stared down at the napkin in my lap, willing my face not to betray the sting. I kept my eyes on the table until a young server stopped beside me, holding a pale yellow envelope, as if she wasn't sure she should even be the one delivering it. She said my last name carefully and handed it over. The seal of the Yavapai County Court flashed red under the lights, and a cold tremor crawled up my spine despite the desert warmth. I tore the envelope open, and the words hit me all at once, my parents listed as plaintiffs, my name as defendant, and a petition demanding the reclamation of Barrett Ranch. For a moment, everything around me vanished. I couldn't feel the ground, couldn't breathe past the weight lodged in my chest. They were taking me to court. They wanted the 12 acres my grandfather left only to me, the one thing he'd trusted me with, the one place where I had once felt safe. They hadn't asked. They hadn't called. They'd simply filed the suit. When I lifted my head, my father glanced in my direction. The champagne flute in his hand trembled just slightly before he turned away, as if nothing on that page had anything to do with him. My cousin, glowing in white, caught my eye for a split second. Something uncertain flickered there, but she slipped her hand into her new husband's arm and walked toward the stage. I didn't blame her. In my family, aligning against my father came with consequences. A song drifted from the speakers. Home ain't always where you're born. The lyric struck harder than it should have, echoing in a place inside me I'd spent years avoiding. I stood before the reception ended. The lights blurred as I walked past the tables, past the laughter, past the easy joy I never quite fit into, outside. The cold Sedona air wrapped around me as I climbed into my car. The envelope lay on the passenger seat, sharp and accusing in the dim glow. After 18 years away, I knew where I had to go. I drove into the night without music, without tears. The desert stretched ahead, dark and vast, and somewhere on that road back to Flagstaff, I felt the past I'd buried rise to meet me. The dirt road curved wide before revealing the ranch, stretching past tall winter pines whose long shadows cut across the frozen ground. Wind from the San Francisco peaks sliced through the valley, sharp enough to sting as I stepped out of the car. The ranch looked weathered, stripped of the warmth it once held. My grandfather's land used to feel like a refuge, but now it resembled a memory left too long under the open sky, faded, thinned, and tired. The front door sagged on crooked hinges, rattling with each gust of wind. In the backyard, deep tire tracks cut through damp earth, their edges still soft. I followed them around the house to a gap in the fencing. The grass was pressed flat, as though heavy equipment had been moved in and out repeatedly. I had been gone for years, but I never imagined coming back to a place so openly used without me. Inside the old barn, the familiar scent of rotting wood and engine oil wrapped around me. It was the smell of summers spent handing tools to my grandfather, of brushing down horses and learning how to fix what was broken. But today, the air felt heavier, as if the barn were hiding something. In the far corner, a small wooden chest caught my eye, my initials carved on the lid in my grandfather's handwriting. My breath tightened as I opened it. Inside, wrapped in cloth, were flight logs from missions I believed had been destroyed. He'd kept every page, not out of sentiment, but because he must have known a day would come when I could no longer outrun my past. A note beneath the logs carried his careful script. If you're reading this, they've left you no choice. Don't let them decide who you are. The words struck with such accuracy it made my lungs lock. Somehow, he had understood the battle long before I did. Outside the barn, fresh footprints marked the stalls larger than mine, too new to belong to him. Inside the house, 2 invoices pinned beneath a hammer bore my father's name, documenting years of land use. They had treated the ranch as if it were theirs long before taking me to court. It felt like stepping into a play that had been performed for years without me, a script everyone else knew, while I stood clueless in the wings. The next morning, I drove to Prescott through a sky so gray it felt hollow. The law office sat in a brick building overlooking a leaf-strewn street. Inside, degrees lined the walls while my attorney sifted through documents. When he finally looked up, his expression shifted. My family wasn't just contesting the land, they were accusing me of fabricating my service. The words sliced colder than the outside air. I never imagined they would go so far. He laid a photo on the desk, me in a hospital bed, wrapped in bandages, eyes vacant, a moment I had never wanted to see again. They were using it as evidence that I was lying. For a moment, the room narrowed around me. When he asked for my final rank, I could only say the truth I could bear to speak. I served, back at the ranch. My phone buzzed. A message appeared from someone who didn't need a name. They're dragging you through the mud. For the final hearing, wear the uniform you earned. Truth only speaks when you show up to let it. 3 lines in the past I had buried clawed its way back. That night, alone in the quiet bedroom, I opened the steel cabinet. The uniform hung exactly as I had left it. When the light caught the silver insignia, something shifted in me, small, but undeniable. I reached into the pocket and found my old military ID. Edges melted from the crash, proof that White Canyon had shaped me in ways I had never spoken aloud. My throat tightened as memories of that night pressed through the sky, ripping apart, metal screaming, the cold biting into my skin as I dragged survivors out of the wreckage. The uniform felt heavier than I remembered, but my hands no longer trembled in fear, only recognition. Maybe it was time to let the truth speak, and this time, I wouldn't run from it. Courtroom 3 in Prescott felt older than anything else in the building, like time itself had settled into the cracked wooden panels and refused to leave. The yellow lights hummed faintly overhead, casting a dull glow over the benches. I walked in wearing a plain white shirt and dark blazer, trying to shrink into the background even as every head turned toward me. The uniform stayed at home. I wasn't ready for it, or for what it represented. The judge asked if the plaintiffs wished to speak. My father shot up before the sentence ended. His voice carried across the room, sharp and theatrical, describing how I had disappeared for 18 years, how I had never sent home $1, how I had no right to the land my grandfather left behind. He dragged out the words in a way meant to cut, meant to remind everyone he saw me as something unfinished, something lesser. My mother inhaled sharply beside him, but kept her eyes down. Then his attorney propped up a poster board, and my stomach dropped. It was me on a hospital bed, bandaged, pale, eyes empty. He claimed I had used this photo to fabricate a story about serving on a special mission, insisting it was merely a civilian accident. The courtroom buzzed with whispers. That picture had been the darkest moment of my life. Seeing it weaponized felt like being stripped bare in front of strangers. The judge asked for my final military rank. I handed him a document listing only my unit and said I had served. Nothing more. Not yet. My father smirked, as if my restraint confirmed everything he wanted the room to believe. But silence wasn't surrender, it was space. Space to breathe. Space to decide when and how the truth would surface. When the hearing adjourned, I stepped into the hallway, My father leaned in close enough that only I could hear him, telling me silence wouldn't save me. I didn't respond, but inside something shifted. He mistook quiet for weakness. He had no idea it was the ground I needed to stand back up. That night, Flagstaff's cold pressed through the windshield as I drove back to the ranch. The road blurred under the streetlights, each golden flash sliding across the dashboard. My heartbeat was uneven, too loud in the silence I clung to because it was the only thing left that felt familiar. Inside, I opened the box of flight logs my grandfather had left behind. A slip of paper fell out, Mission White Canyon, 2 survivors. The moment I read it, memory slammed into me. The black New Mexico sky, the helicopter bucking before it dropped, the storm swallowing our voices, my hands bleeding from cold as I dragged 2 men out of the wreckage, the others I couldn't save. That was the truth I never wanted exposed, not bravery, but guilt. I found the old commendation letter addressed to my grandfather, the one my father had hidden. He had known I wasn't lying. He had known everything, and still he accused me. Another envelope contained the honorary Major General appointment. The silver insignia inside caught the light, sharp and cold, like the night we crashed. My phone buzzed a message from the Department of Defense, offering verification for the next hearing. For the first time in years, I wasn't entirely alone. I looked in the bedroom mirror, seeing not defeat but exhaustion before a rise. If they wanted the truth judged, then the truth would have to walk in with me. I opened the steel cabinet and placed my hand on the uniform. A different battle was about to begin. Morning settled over the ranch in a pale gray veil, cold slipping through the windows and into the floorboards. The house felt unnervingly still, as if it were waiting for me to do what I had avoided for years. I stood before the steel cabinet I hadn't opened in a decade, the same cabinet where I had buried the version of myself I couldn't face. Today, the past wasn't knocking. It was demanding entry. The lock clicked. Light spilled across the uniform inside, its deep blue fabric catching the sun in a sharp streak of silver. The insignia shimmered with everything I had earned and everything I had lost. Beneath it lay a worn envelope in my grandfather's shaky handwriting. Inside was a photo from the day I enlisted, me standing by a helicopter, his hand steady on my shoulder. On the back, Josie, your path isn't meant for them to understand. It's meant for you to live. The truth struck hard. I reached into the pocket of the uniform and found my old military ID. Edges melted proof of White Canyon and the pieces of myself I left there. My vision blurred as the crash replayed in my mind. My phone rang. Perry's name lit the screen. His voice was low, steady. He said the court deserved the truth, and he would fly in because he owed me his life. The past was no longer something I could outrun. I hung the uniform on the mirror, touched the insignia, and felt a quiet resolve settle through me. Tomorrow, I would wear it, not for them, for the truth. Snow drifted outside, the same kind that fell the night of the crash. In the bottom drawer, I found the lighter from my old teammate Stay Alive engraved on the side. As I slid my arms into the uniform, my hands trembled with recognition. Not fear. By morning, Prescott's courthouse steps were slick with frost. When I entered courtroom 3 in full uniform, conversations stopped. The judge rose to his feet. Gasps rippled through the room. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. My father went pale. My lawyer presented urgent documents from the Department of Defense White Canyon records, confirmation of lives saved, and the resolution of my honorary rank. The opposing attorney faltered. Then Perry entered, limping but strong, snow dusting his shoulders. He testified that he was alive because of me. The judge turned to my father, calling his accusations baseless and insulting to the military. One gavel strike declared the ranch mine. A woman in the back stood in emotion. My mother cried silently. My brother twisted his cap out of shape. I straightened my uniform and walked out, not out of anger, but because I had finally learned to stand without needing their eyes on me. The hallway outside of the Prescott courtroom felt suspended between motion and stillness. Snow drifted past the tall windows in light, powdery flakes, dissolving the moment they touched the glass. Cold seeped through the seams of my uniform, but the lingering heat on the fabric reminded me my body was still bracing from what had unfolded minutes earlier. I leaned back against the dark wooden wall, Feeling the rigid edge press into my spine, my hands trembled. Not from fear, but from the weight of having finally placed every hidden truth on the table. The courtroom door hung slightly ajar. Through the narrow opening came soft murmurs, shifting feet, chairs sliding into place. No one approached me, yet I felt the weight of their eyes. Surprise at who I truly was, respect for what they had just learned, confusion about how someone like me had lived in the shadows for so long. I let the silence envelop me. After years of being defined by others, I needed this moment to define myself. My father's voice shattered the stillness, rising in disbelief and rage before the guards intervened. I didn't turn. For the first time, his anger felt small, like a man trying to hold on to a story that no longer worked. Then my mother stepped into the hall, eyes red and swollen, hands clenched together. She whispered my name, but her voice faltered. I touched the insignia on my chest, grounding myself in the truth I'd reclaimed. I told her quietly that I needed a few days. She nodded, offering me space she'd never given before. A passing veteran paused, rested a hand on my arm, and thanked me. His words settled deeper than the verdict itself. When I stepped outside, snow landed gently on my uniform, melting into the dark fabric. I had won the battle of truth, but the war inside my family had only just begun. The late afternoon light stretched across the ranch in a thin golden layer, fading slowly along the slopes of the San Francisco peaks. I tightened another screw on the worn porch railing, the dry wood cracking softly under my hand. The wind carried the smell of cold pine, and for a moment, everything was quiet until the sputtering engine of an old truck broke through the silence. I didn't need to look. That sound had lived in my childhood. My father stepped out without his usual force. No slammed door, no heavy steps meant to intimidate. He stood with his hands deep in his coat pockets, shoulders drooping as if he'd finally run out of ways to make himself large. For a long moment, we just stared at each other across the porch. When I asked why he had done all of it, the lawsuit, the accusations his voice caught, he admitted he had been afraid I'd leave forever, afraid my brother couldn't keep the land, afraid of losing whatever authority he believed made him a father. The words didn't excuse anything, but they stripped away the image I'd carried for years. He wasn't towering or cruel in that moment, just unsure and old. When I confronted him about the commendation letter he'd hidden, he didn't deny it. He said he couldn't accept a life for me that he didn't understand, one he didn't know how to be proud of. The honesty hurt more than anger ever had. I set my Major General insignia on the porch table, the metal ringing softly. I told him I didn't need his pride, only that he stop erasing me. His eyes lifted, wet and unsteady, carrying remorse instead of rage. A blue jay landed on the railing, calling out once before disappearing into the trees. My father exhaled a long, worn-out breath. As he climbed back into his truck, he paused and said, "My mother planned to bring food tomorrow, and that he would come too." It wasn't an apology, but it was real. And for now, real was enough. A clear Flagstaff morning settled over the ranch, the snow from the night before lying thin and bright across the grass. Sunlight filtered through the window at an angle, catching the scuffed metal of my grandfather's compass and scattering faint lines of light across the table. For a moment, I simply stood there, realizing I was living a kind of mourning I once believed I no longer deserved. The weeks after the hearing had been spent repairing the ranch, sanding floors, fixing windows, clearing out the west room. I wasn't rebuilding a house, I was rebuilding a life. And today, that room would hold the first monthly gathering for veterans. A few old chairs, a shaky table, cheap coffee, small things, but warm in a way that mattered. As I prepared, the door opened softly. My parents stepped inside, taking seats in the back without a word. No apologies, no explanations, just presence. For the first time, that felt like enough. When I addressed the group, compass in hand, my voice held steady. I spoke of honor, of rising after collapse, of how peace is built, not given. My mother wiped her eyes. My father stared at his weathered hands, shoulders lowered. After everyone left, I stayed behind, pulled out the pocket knife my grandfather had given me, and carved words into the back of the compass. Peace is earned, Not inherited. Outside. Snow drifted lightly. No longer bitter. I stepped onto the porch, looked toward the mountains, and whispered to the memory of the man who'd believed in me first. I've come home to live, not to hide, 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 not to hide.